Water, tick. Slides, tick. Hello, I'm Carlton, this is me, that's my avatar there. I'm Carlton Gibson on GitHub, I'm on Fosterdon, I've got a website. With my friend Will, I co-host a podcast called Django Chat. If you haven't listened to that, please go and give it a listen. We get guests from around the community and we chat about Django. If you don't know me, between 2018 and 2023, I was one of the Django Fellows. Now, the Fellows are contracted by the DSF, the Django Software Foundation, to do the day-to-day maintenance on Django. They do triage, ticket, pull request, review, releases, all of that stuff, the stuff that keeps Django going. Now, I've stepped down, this talk isn't a fundraiser for the DSF, but go and sponsor the DSF. You, or better yet, your company, you make a small donation that helps keep the Django going. You're making an investment in the sustainability of the framework you built your business upon. So let's go, just go and do that. After I stepped down, I started on a project called Paths, which is in the monitoring and evaluation, which is a monitoring and evaluation learning tool for development and sustainability projects. I meant to say that we're hiring, but we're not hiring yet. We're busy bootstrapping. We're a year in and we're going well, but it's this next year that's going to tell whether we can hire or not. So keep it in mind, maybe talk to me, DjangoCon 2025. Today's talk is called API Maybe. It's about bootstrapping a web application, specifically our web application in 2024. Before working as a fellow, I worked on Django REST Framework a lot. So back in 2018 when I started, it was API first. It may have been API only. The world was very definitely API first. You work on a team with a very clear division between backend, built by one group of folks, that would expose a REST-like JSON API, and the front end, built by a totally different group of people, would then consume that in quite often as the API's only client. Okay? Now you might be sat there thinking, hang on, it's still exactly like that. But spin forward to 2024 and things have changed a little bit. Largely in response to the seemingly ever more complexity in the front end. The last few years have seen a return to a focus on rendering HTML on the server and the emergence of a family of related front-end frameworks that go under the monkey of HTML over the wire. Now HTMX is oh, hang on, no spoilers. HTMX is the one that's probably grabbed the most attention in the Django space, but Turbo, Unpoly, and others are doing similar things in a very similar way. So I'm going to talk about HTMX and all that. If you like a different one, you do you, right? It's the underlying idea that's important here. But something else changed between 2018 and 2024, which was where did all the money go, right? The great inflation that followed the pandemic, the global supply chain crisis, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine marked an end of the zero interest rate environment we'd enjoyed for the decade or so since the last financial crisis. You've all felt it. Tech layoffs are in the news every single week, it seems. But it means that you can't just go out and pick up a big old bag of cash and say, come on, let's build a multidisciplinary team to bootstrap your product. On Paths, we have a limited budget. We've had tight milestones, like 12 weeks to get from the idea to a proof of concept. Another 12 weeks to get from the proof of concept to what you might think of as an MVP, and only a few months to flesh that out with supporting bits like versioning and role-based permissions and all these things that a rich app needs. And then we didn't have cash for a big team. On the technical side, it's literally just me. So there's no way on earth I could have done that if I had to take on Django and take on a big front-end framework like React. Okay? My contention is that by leaning into Django, you can get just as much done as bigger teams using more complex stacks, and that Django really shines exactly when money is tight. Django has always been the framework for perfectionists with deadlines. Well, when those deadlines are financial, all the more. Django is the perfect framework for our post-zero interest rate world. But first, I want to talk about locality of behavior. Locality of behavior is a way of thinking about and assessing code. Some code has locality of behavior when everything you need to understand that code is right there in front of you. The contrast is when you need to go and look somewhere else to see what the behavior is going to be. This is what Karen was talking about just now. The idea is that other things being equal, greater locality of behavior makes your code easier to reason about, easier to maintain, and easier to iterate on. Again, you'll be familiar with this. Tailwind CSS is a utility-first CSS framework that's very popular. It gives you utility classes that you embed in your HTML to control styling, rather than needing to keep that code in a separate CSS file. Alpine JS is a rugged little jQuery-like JavaScript framework that lets you define your component behaviors again in your HTML, rather than putting them in a separate JavaScript file. Of course, HTMX adds a small set of HTML attributes that expand the native powers of HTML, all again without leaving your HTML file. On top of these tools, both in the name of locality behavior, I manage a package called Neapolitan, which is my take on quick CRUD views for Django, and Django template partials, which adds reusable named template fragments to the Django template language. Now, I suggest that, particularly with new code, while you're still working on it, while it's still in flux, a focus on locality of behavior can help you go faster. But I don't think I've said that disclaimer boldly enough. So let me be 100% clear. Locality of behavior is a starting point, not a destination. If I've got a button that's styled with Tailwind, I'm not going to mindlessly copy and paste those classes around every time I need a button. Right? I might stick the HTML in a partial or a template tag, but much more likely I'm just going to pull it directly into my CSS file as a new button utility, as anybody would always obviously do. That's what Karen was kind of talking about with Alpine JS. Alpine JS is awesome. A little one-line handler is beautiful in your template file. 2 lines, well, no problem. And at any given point, just adding one more line of JavaScript to that, it's not a problem. Right? But at some point, probably quite soon, you're going to pull your JavaScript out into a separate file or into an Alpine plugin so that you can use it just as an attribute declaration on your HTML. You're going to get linting, formatting, testing, all the things that Karen was worried about. And again, you're going to use your judgment as to when to sacrifice a little bit of locality behavior as your code scales to gain in maintainability. Just because we're talking about locality of behavior doesn't mean we're throwing away good engineering practices that we've learned since our cradle. If you're using Neapolitan's CRUD view that I'll show you in a bit, you might say, oh, well, this logic would be better as a separate view. Well, so on. I'll try not to win because I say that, of course, you shouldn't put 3,000 lines of code in your URL stuff. But I will say, on locality of behavior, hold the line. Holding the line on locality of behavior can really pay dividends. Dry, separation of concerns, sure, all those things are great. But for every one of those, there's a write it twice, or a 3 times refactor, or something like that. As I was writing this talk, Luke Plant published a nice post comparing these things to proverbs. They're great when they apply, but there's always a contradictory one if you need it, right? You can always fish that one out. And again, we need to be sensitive with these things. As a junior, I learned a principle called protected variations. And the idea is that you identify the areas of your code that are subject to change, and you build a stable interface around them, so that even as they evolve, they don't infect your code everywhere else. Right? Well, new code, when you're still working on it, when it's still in flux, when you don't really know what it's going to look like, is the perfect case of code that is likely to change. By focusing on locality of behavior, by keeping everything together, you make sure that any changes don't escape out of that file or out of your module, right? If it looks like you're repeating yourself, violating dry, but if you extract the code somewhere and then reuse it, and then when you realize, oh no, actually I do need a change, you've then got multiple places to fix, okay? You violated protected variations. Now, on the other hand, if you just defer extracting that bit of code slightly, focusing on locality behavior, you allow the code to stabilize. That means less churn. But it also buys you more time for the deeper patterns to emerge. Quickly refactoring to dry, it's all very well and good, and it can help, but it can be a premature optimization. It can lead to your code getting stuck in local optima. Buying the space for those deeper patterns to emerge is, for me, one of the greatest payoffs about thinking of locality of behavior. I think it's really interesting to think about how far we can or how far we should push locality of behavior when we're building our applications. I think that's a discussion. I think it's case by case, app by app, team by team, but from where I'm sat, it's super exciting. It's interesting, right? So, leaning into Django, what was the talk about again? Oh yes. API maybe, bootstrapping an application circa 2024. I think that Django has a grain. It wants you to do things a certain way, and the tip is go with it, okay? So this is going to be a refresher on Django, right? The first thing you need is a model and a view. 90% of every app is basic CRUD operations. Last year I introduced Neapolitan. It's my take on quick CRUD views for Django. A year later, I couldn't be happy with it. Apart from the odd template view, Neapolitan has totally replaced my use of the generic class-based views from Django. So let me quickly show it to you again. I've got a model. It's a bookmark model. It's got a URL, a title, a note, and whether it's a favorite or not. I want an easy CRUD view for it without it taking all day. So I import Neapolitan's CRUD view, I define a subclass, I tell what model, what fields to use, and what that I want to be able to filter on its word favorites. I just add it to my URL patterns, and that's it. Neapolitan's CRUD view provides a standard list, detail, create and edit and delete views for a model, as well as all the hooks you'd need to be able to customize any part of it. Provides base templates and reusable template tags to make getting your model on the page as easy as possible. Where you take your app after that is up to you, but Neapolitan will get you started. The key point for me is that your code for your view lives in a single class, so it's all right in front of you. As we said, maybe get to the point where you break it out into a separate view, but in general, you get a long way before that happens. In the meantime, you've got a working space that allows you to develop your code in a kind of controlled environment. It's all just in that one class, and as long as I keep it there, I'm safe. CRUD view itself is just a single class. It pulls all the familiar APIs from Django's generic class-based views, get form, get query set, get context data, all the ones you're used to. But with Neapolitan, I'm never asking myself, oh, where's that implemented? Oh, where is it overridden? I don't need a whole separate website. It's in one file. It's there. It makes a big difference. I'm having massive fun with it, and I recommend it to you, so go check it out. But once you've got your view and your model in place, the next thing is your template. Now, I've been rediscovering Django templates. I don't have too much to say, just send HTML. But that was the payoff from the move away from API first. Just sending HTML is a big win. You're not creating serializers and then building your HTML in a whole separate stack, but you're doing it right there in Django, in the same environment that you're writing your views. After a decade of not really pushing their limits, I think it's an exciting time for Django's. For Django templates. What's built in is great. I've lost count of the number of times over the last year that I've wanted something. I've gone to the Django docs and it's already there. And it's like, wow, I've just never used that filter. It's been there for 15 years. Karen probably added it. Writing your own custom tags is easy, it's powerful, it's probably, I think it's a little bit under-documented. I think writing custom tags is a really great tool. It's like, oh, I've got a little bit of logic that I want to put in my template, and Django templates don't let me, but if I write a custom tag, I can encapsulate that, I can test it, and it keeps my templates clean. And there are a number of packages out there that add things, slippers, Django components, the list goes on. It's a vibrant time, and I think we've got a real opportunity now with this HTML return to server-side rendering thing to push the Django template forward in a way that it just hasn't been pushed forward for a decade or more. So that's exciting. So we've got models, we've got views, we've rediscovered the template. The last thing we need is forms. The final component is forms, right? Sometimes I think that forms are the kind of missing link. They play this dual role in Django of being the data sanitation layer of your application and of presenting the user app, the UI. People think forms are about rendering. No, they're about data sanitation, but they also do this rendering. If you want, it's okay sending templates, right? But if you want your user to actually update your application in any way, you're going to need a form. Forms are your thing. So there's this conversation in Django often about where should we keep our business logic in Django. Is it in the view? Is it in the model? Well, I think quite often it's in the form layer in its role as a data sanitation layer. So I want to give you an example of adding parent objects to a model. So let's recall our bookmark model. Let's say we want to add a foreign key to the parent user. Okay? How do we go about associating that user when we're creating the bookmark? Well, the standard form valid implementation goes like this. We just call form.save, store that in self.object, and then we return a redirect response to the detail view. Okay? But if we want to attach a reference to the current user, we're going to need to do something different. The usual approach is to call form.save with the commit equals false argument. When we add the use, so when we commit that form.save commit equals false, it doesn't save the object. We then attach the request.user, and we then save the object ourselves, and we probably need to call this form, this mysterious form save many to many method, which we always forget to do. We don't on our bookmark model, but in general, we need to do that step as well, and then, it's only then that we can return the redirect response. Now that's okay, right? Like it works, right? But it makes an absolute mess of our view. More though, the view's job is about turning requests into responses. By having the user set in the view, it's making the view responsible for the business logic. The bookmarks need a reference to the parent user. What we want to do is to move that into the form. So if we create a custom form class with a custom init, we can override the init method to take an optional reference to the parent user. We give it the user equals none keyword argument there. We can check that, and if we didn't pass an instance, that means if we're creating a new bookmark and not updating an existing one, then we can require that the parent user is passed instead of the instance. And we can raise a clear error if not. Okay? Then we set the user on the form's bookmark instance here ourselves at the bottom. And so when we come to save it later in the view, the current user reference is already set, and we don't have to infect our view logic with that. So then in our view, all we do is we tell our CRUD view class to use the bookmark form, and then we override the get form method here to, if we're doing a create method, get the current user and pass it to the form as we need to do. Okay? We no longer need to do anything custom in form valid, and the responsibility for associating the bookmark to its parent user lives in the form layer, where I'd argue it more rightly belongs. Now that's just one example, but you can generalize. Where possible, you want to push business logic into the form layer rather than keeping it in the view, so the view does no more than call form is valid, form save, and branch accordingly to determine what response to reply. The parent object pattern comes up for almost every model. Generally, your models form some sort of tree, and each model refers to the parent above and needs that foreign key set. So I'm going to generalize this pattern and make it fully declarative in Neapolitan, but there's nothing Neapolitan specific about this. You could do it with the generic form view from Django and do the same thing. So then that's our Django stack, and we want to spice it up a bit because Django's a bit boring and we can't just have full page loads and all the rest. So we need HTMX and template partials. HTMX was the change that made all this exciting, right? All the related technologies. We want we want modern, interactive, oh, isn't that nice response from our clients, but we want to do that still with Django. So pushing HTMX, it gets you a long way, and I'll just say now because I won't remember to say it later. It's worth looking at the extensions on HTML. Like, for instance, the messages framework. You want to, oh yeah, you successfully did something. Well, it's got an extension that you can put up a toast, you could style that however you want, and there's a remove me extension to HTMX that will take it out of the DOM for you, 3 seconds later or whatever. So you don't need extra JavaScript. You can just expand HTMX. I would look into that. Let me show you an example. So HTMX, you've got a simple button. It's got an HX attribute that goes and fetches the clicked URL when you click it, and everything, it replaces whatever HTML comes back, puts it in the DOM. Now everything there is in the one file, and once you know what those HX attributes do, you can see the behavior without going to it anywhere else. On top of that, the thing that's really sort of pushed it for me is Django template partials. Now this is an idea from HTMX, which when you've got a full template, you perhaps only want to replace a single bit. So you've got, I don't know, a list of to-dos, and you update one to-do, you just want to go and fetch a single to-do, not refresh the whole list. Well, You just want that small bit. And with the Django template language by itself, we'd have to move that into an include file in order to reuse it. But Django template partials lets you define these fragments in line and then in the same template, and then you can reference them by name later on. So you define a partial in your view, you load partials, you use the start partial, end partial tag. I even changed that. I have it. It's called partial def and end partial def now. That's okay, don't worry. The old names still work. So first of all, we load them, we define our partial, and then later on we can use it. And we just use this partial tag to say, look, load the partial tag, and it gets included in the right place. And that enables the reuse, but you can also, it's also integrated with a template loader. So each template has a dictionary essentially of defined partials, and if you use the template, Django template partials loader, you can just add the fragment identifier on to the template name, and the template loader will go and look for the template. If it's found, it will look to see if the partial is defined on it, and if so, it will just return that bit of the template for you. And it's a way of getting some reuse, a degree of reuse out of the Django template languages, which is a little bit more flexible than includes. And that view, that change there, that would be just done in the view. And that's the only change you'd have. So if this is an HTMX request, load this template instead of the other template and carry on doing exactly what you've done before. The rest of it is entirely transparent to your view layer. You still return a template response as you always have, and all the rest of it. So for me, the combination of HTMX and template partials has been really powerful. It effectively lets me stay in the one template file with the one view class supporting that for much longer than it was possible to do before. Now this is a real productivity boost. You can simply get more done, right? And you can tidy it up later, once the structure's laid down and once the patterns start to emerge. So finally then, I just want to mention Alpine JS. It's what Karen was talking about again. It's lightweight, comes in at a few kilobytes. Now if you only use it for one thing in your site, well you'd be better off just with vanilla JS. But if you're using it over your site, those kilobytes buy you a lot. You get state management, you get the reactivity, you get the callbacks. It's a lovely little library, so I do recommend giving it a try. It gives you a lot of bang for your bucks. It's easy to use. It's a simple script tag, and it's like HTMX and Tailwind and the others. Here's an example. Here, you define a component using X data, and we'll give it a count, and then with the X text, we can say put the count in this paragraph, and then with the on-click handler, we just say increment the count. And that will do exactly what you imagine, and that's it. It's lovely and declarative. Again, it's all in the file in front of you, and it's got really good locality behavior. I think it feels like jQuery. It's the first thing I've used in a long time that gives me joy. On the front end. So, Alpine JS and forms again. The problem that I had for a decade or more was that because I was API first, I was declaring serializers. And serializers were, just as forms were encapsulating a lot of my business logic. And then I'd want to do an HTML page, and I'd have to create an HTML form, and I'd be like, oh no, I've got to duplicate all that work, and so it would never happen. Right? Well, I'm declaring all these forms, now I'm using JavaScript. Do I have to declare serializers? I hope not. No. JavaScript has a form data object. The browser has a form data object. You can instantiate one of those, and then you can add your fields to it, and you can wrap a helper so that it's just like JSONify or whatever, stringify or whatever the thing is there. And you can send form data back to Django, where your Django view is already primed to receive that form data. And then it can send back some HTML. So you can use Alpine JS in quite a rich widget. We've got a drag and drop interface which we built in Alpine JS, and it's perfectly maintainable, and it's lovely, and it's like, okay, you can scale up. But what we do is we trigger an event from Alpine, which is picked up by a helper, which uses HTMX to dispatch the request back to the server and replace the Alpine enhanced HTML that comes back to the server, which then Alpine can work with. It's a lovely setup. It really does work well. There are some life cycle tricks. Sometimes, if you try and do something with Alpine before the DOM's fully fully settled in, it just won't work. And you won't get much debugging help from it. You have to do it. So there are some tricks. There's a next tick helper which says wait till the DOM's settled and then do your Alpine magic. If HTMX, you sometimes need to call prepare on any new HTML you put into the DOM. With JavaScript, you need to tell HTMX that it's there. And likewise, sometimes you need to tell Alpine that you've put a new tree in, and you can call Alpine init tree to say, hey, here's some new HTML. But these tricks, they're not tricky. I'd say it's a very good stack. And it's enabled us to get from 0 to what I call a genuinely viable product in a quite short amount of time. The next year, as I said, is going to tell whether we get, to fully sustainable. But leaning into Django, adding HTMX with a few sprinkles of Alpine to enhance, it's a great combination, and I really do recommend it to you. Looking forward, just to wrap up, I just want to talk about a couple of things that are on our roadmap. Mostly it's like keep refining, just keep doing the same. We're young, it was only me, there's lots to do. I have to-dos upstream this all over the place, but that will come over time. There's two things we really want to add. One is async for collaborative editing. And this is exactly what the talk that you just had was talking about. We've got a nice table view with data in, and people can edit the data in there, but it's single user. And that's not really a problem for us, but there's going to be the case where two users are editing the same data, and what we need is you to get a notification saying, hey, this was updated, and then we need the UI to go on, by the way, I'm going to refresh that data and give you some nice animation so it draws your eye and tells you what happens and all those other things. So we need to run either WebSockets or server-sent events on the side of Django, and to chip in on the question, I absolutely agree. Run your async on the side until you're 100% happy with it, because your WSGI server is much more battle-tested. And then the other interesting problem is about performance and latency. Paths is based in, the server is based in Paris, in AWS's Paris region. Our clients are based in Kenya, Bangladesh, China, Vietnam, Turkey, around the world. It's truly distributed. So performance is key. Now, most users are office-based. We don't have problems with mobiles and poor networks and all of that, but the pure distance is enough to give us a noticeable performance issue. And we've done the basics, and we haven't even pushed all the buttons yet. So there's a lot of roadmap to go. But the thing that we're thinking about is, well, okay, do we need an outpost in Nairobi? Do we need one in Shanghai? Do we need to be closer to the user? But what's interesting is that at a really high level, this latency problem was precisely why we were all meant to move to thick clients and rich SPAs in the first place. Supposedly, smaller package sizes from shipping JSON to the client rather than HTML would lead to better performance. Now, with the modern web, we've seen that that isn't the case. Bundle sizes are so big that pages remain unresponsive for an age. It's actually slower for the browser to convert JSON back to HTML on the client than it is to just accept HTML in the first place. So I have to say, I really don't know where this question about performance and latency is going to go, but what I can say is that wherever we end up, it will be based on user needs, and it will be based on evidence, and we will grow into it. We're not just going to default to it simply because that's what Facebook felt that they needed half a decade ago. Integrations, well, yes, we'll need an API, of course, because people want to plug it into their Power BI, dashboard or whatever it is they've got. But the shape of that looks much different from a REST API powering your main application. It's like, can we get a read-only CSV export? It's a single thing that you just tag onto your CRUD view and export in the right format that you want. You've already got your auth, you've already got everything that you've got in play. You didn't have to recreate that in a second sort of stack again. So, that's it. Leaning into Django. When I stepped down from the fellow role in order to get back to building things with Django rather than just working on it, I was looking forward to this opportunity. And I have to say, I'm having the time of my life. In 2018, I never expected web to swing back Django's way. Then the thought was, well, can we merge DRF into the core? Well, I think that moment's gone. There are too many exciting things happening around APIs with Django for Django to pick one option and then crown it. But I hope I've shown you how, by leaning into Django and then adding, little bits of tech that spice it up. It's not a question you need to think about until you're well down the road. An API? Well, maybe.
Thanks.